In the spring of 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic hung in the balance. German U-boats prowled the North Atlantic shipping lanes in wolfpacks, threatening Britain's vital supply convoys. March 1943 marked the lowest point for the Allies. In that single month, U-boats sank roughly 567,000 tons of Allied shipping. An Admiralty report soberly concluded that the Germans had never come so close to severing the Atlantic lifeline as they did in those first 20 days of March 1943. By April, the Allies were seriously concerned that the U-boat offensive might succeed in strangling Britain. As one Royal Navy officer recalled, "There's nothing more sorrowful or harrowing than to see a ship and to hear it sink, capturing the desperation of those convoy battles." Yet even as U-boats celebrated their happy time, the Allied response was gathering strength. Throughout late 1942 and into 1943, the Allies had been steadily improving their anti-submarine capabilities. New technologies were coming into play. Centimetric wavelength radar sets on patrol aircraft and escort ships could detect U-boats on the surface, even at night or in rough seas, far outperforming earlier radar systems. High-frequency direction finding or huff-duff equipment became standard on escort vessels, allowing them to intercept and pinpoint U-boat radio transmissions and thus locate wolfpacks. Escort crews underwent better training in new tactics, including coordinated group maneuvers and creeping attacks guided by sound ranging, techniques pioneered by ace U-boat hunters like Captain Johnny Walker. The Royal Navy and US Navy introduced new weapons, such as the Hedgehog mortar that could hurl a pattern of depth charges ahead of a ship, and the Mark 24 Fido acoustic homing torpedo dropped from aircraft to chase down submerged submarines. Crucially, more escort ships were coming into service. Hardy new destroyer escorts and frigates designed for mass production, and additional long-range patrol aircraft like the B-24 Liberator closed the notorious mid-Atlantic air gap. Escort aircraft carriers and converted merchant aircraft carriers, MAC ships, began to accompany convoys or operate in roving support groups, bringing with them a small air wing to spot and attack U-boats far out to sea. Allied codebreakers were also contributing. By late 1942, British and American intelligence had largely cracked the German Enigma naval codes again, providing valuable ultra-intelligence on U-boat movements and rendezvous, though by May 1943, this advantage was less decisive than the sheer strength of convoy defences. All these improvements had been gradual, but by April 1943, they were coalescing into a formidable anti-submarine system. Still, the U-boat force under Admiral Dönitz remained confident and aggressive. Over 160 German U-boats were operational, and Dönitz continuously fed new boats into the Atlantic patrol lines in hopes of overwhelming the convoys. This set the stage for an epic confrontation in May 1943, a month that would enter U-boat lore as Black May. In late April 1943, a slow westbound convoy, codenamed ONS-5, 42 merchant ships bound from Britain to North America, departed Liverpool. It carried a modest close escort of 6 warships, 2 destroyers, 1 frigate, and 4 corvettes, under Commander Peter Gretton. Unbeknownst to the convoy, Dönitz had massed a huge wolfpack to intercept it. Over 50 U-boats were deployed in patrol lines across the North Atlantic shipping routes. While no major convoy battles occurred in early April, by the end of the month, the U-boat arm was ready to relaunch coordinated attacks. On April 28, 1943, one of Dönitz's patrol lines made contact with ONS-5 in rough seas south of Greenland. At first, bad weather favoured the U-boats. Howling Atlantic gales scattered the convoy's ships and strained the escorts. Several German submarines, around 5 or 6, managed to shadow the convoy and strike. In the initial contacts, one merchant ship was torpedoed. Sensing a major battle, Western Approach's command rushed additional help to Gretton's escort force. A newly formed support group, Escort Group 3, consisting of 5 British destroyers, was dispatched from St. John's, Newfoundland, to reinforce ONS-5. They arrived on April 30th, bringing the convoy's escort up to 14 warships. Faced with unexpectedly stiff resistance and meagre results, Dönitz briefly called off the attack on May 1st. However, the convoy's ordeal was far from over. The storm had forced some Allied escorts to refuel or return to port, temporarily thinning the protective screen. ONS-5, now delayed and straggling, blundered into another U-boat patrol line on May 4th, this one composed of 29 submarines lying in wait. Dönitz promptly ordered every available U-boat to converge on the convoy. What followed was one of the fiercest convoy battles of the war. As darkness fell on May 4th, dozens of U-boats pressed home attacks from all sides of ONS-5. The German torpedo salvos found targets. Over the nights of May 4th and 5th, the convoy lost 12 merchant ships sunk. The situation looked grim for the Allies. Gretton's escorts were stretched thin, trying to fend off numerous contacts in turbulent seas. But Allied advantages were beginning to tell. A Royal Canadian Air Force PBY Canso, flying from Newfoundland, had already caught U-209 as it approached and damaged it so severely that the U-boat sank a few days later. This long-range air patrol demonstrated that even the mid-ocean air gap was closing. By May, very long-range aircraft from Newfoundland, Iceland, and Northern Ireland could just about cover the convoy routes. On May 5th, heavy fog rolled in, drastically reducing surface visibility. This shift favoured the Allied defenders. The fog blinded U-boat lookouts, while Allied radar could still sniff out submarine positions. Meanwhile, another support group, Escort Group 1, comprised of British sloops and frigates, arrived to bolster the convoy's protection. With calmer seas by May 6th, the escorts could make full use of their sonar and radar. The Hunter became the hunted. Allied warships vigorously pursued sonar contacts and launched a counteroffensive against the wolfpack. Over May 5th to 6th, the escorts sank 5 U-boats, 4 by the convoy's close escort and 1 with help from the support group. Another U-boat had been destroyed earlier in the battle, making a total of 6 or 7 U-boats lost during the ONS-5 action. The tide had turned within the battle itself. What started as a potential disaster was flipped into a defensive victory by the convoy's reinforced escort. When Dönitz finally broke off the attack, the balance sheet was disastrous for Germany. About 13 merchant ships sunk at the cost of 7 U-boats destroyed. Nearly 40 U-boats had participated in the chase, but thanks to Allied tactics and technology, ONS-5 survived with the majority of its ships still safe. British authorities hailed the outcome as a decisive victory, and many historians later identified the Battle of ONS-5 as the turning point in the Atlantic War. One German U-boat man would dub it the Stalingrad at sea, a reference to the catastrophic defeat on the Eastern Front, while Allied sailors began to sense that the worst of the U-boat peril had passed. The defeat at ONS-5 was only the beginning of Germany's Black May. Throughout the month of May 1943, Admiral Dönitz continued to throw wolfpacks against the North Atlantic convoys, only to meet with mounting losses. The Allies, now bolstered by additional escorts and air cover, had effectively solved the wolfpack threat. Convoy HX-237, an eastbound convoy in mid-May, was protected by the British C-2 Escort Group and augmented by Escort Group 5, which included the escort carrier HMS Biter. When a U-boat pack targeted HX-237, the convoy's defenders fought off the assault. Carrier-borne aircraft and surface escorts combined to sink 3 U-boats, at the cost of only 3 straggling merchant ships lost from the convoy. Not long after, another wolfpack pounced on convoy SC-129. This time, the Germans sank 2 merchant vessels. Kapitänleutnant Siegfried von Forstner of U-402 was only able to claim those 2 ships before Allied counterattacks drove the pack off. Reinforced by HMS Biter's support group, managed to destroy 1 U-boat during that engagement. As the U-boats moved in on SC-130 around May 18th to 20th, they found a formidable shield. 13 Allied warships, 9 in the close escort and 4 in a support group, guarded the convoy. With ample air support overhead, including very long-range B-24 Liberator bombers, the U-boats never got the chance to inflict damage. Allied aircraft struck the gathering wolfpack before it could mount a coordinated attack, scattering the submarines. Aggressive counter-hunting by the escorts sank at least one U-boat, and patrolling RAF Liberator bombers destroyed another in the vicinity. By May 25th, Convoy SC-130 arrived in Liverpool completely unscathed, an almost unthinkable outcome just a few months prior. Around the same time, Convoy ON-184, outbound from the UK, was targeted by U-boats, but it too was heavily defended, including the presence of the US Navy escort carrier USS Bogue and her destroyer screen. The wolfpack could not penetrate the convoy's strong escort. Not a single merchant was lost, while aircraft from Bogue managed to sink one of the lurking U-boats. Another fast eastbound convoy, HX-239, met a similar outcome. 8 escorts and the small carrier HMS Archer kept the U-boats at bay, and Archer's aircraft destroyed one submarine with no Allied ships lost. In engagement after engagement, the pattern had inverted from the dark days of March. Now it was the U-boats that were being hunted down in significant numbers, often for little or no success on their part. The cumulative toll on Dönitz's force was unprecedented. Allied reports at the time tallied approximately 34 U-boats destroyed in the Atlantic during May. Modern analysis shows the Germans actually lost about 40 U-boats in May 1943 from all causes worldwide, roughly 1/4 of their entire operational U-boat fleet, including at least 32 sunk in the North Atlantic convoy zone alone. For comparison, in the first 4 months of 1943, the average U-boat losses had been only 14 per month. Now, in a single month, the U-boat fleet was hemorrhaging boats and trained crews on a scale never seen before. According to detailed U-boat loss records, 42 U-boats were lost in May 1943, with 1,832 German submariners perishing and only 183 survivors rescued. It was by far the worst month of the war for Dönitz's undersea fleet, nearly 3 times the number of U-boats lost in the whole of 1941, as one analysis noted. Equally devastating was the qualitative loss. Many of the U-boat crews sunk in Black May included veteran and junior officers who would have formed the next generation of skilled U-boat captains. No amount of new U-boat production could immediately replace this human and material attrition. By contrast, Allied shipping losses in May 1943 fell dramatically. Only around 264,000 tons of merchant shipping were sunk that month, down from the peak in March. And, in the critical convoy battles of May, the U-boats managed to sink just 19 merchant ships, while losing 20 U-boats in those same convoy actions. Excluding the initial bloodletting at ONS-5, the exchanges in May were even more lopsided. Outside of ONS-5, the wolfpacks in May 1943 sank a mere 6 ships for the loss of 13 U-boats. The advantage had swung decisively to the Allied side. The abrupt reversal of fortune in May 1943 sent shockwaves through the German Naval Command. Admiral Dönitz, the architect of the U-boat campaign and a former U-boat commander himself, was initially skeptical of the steep losses. He probed for explanations. Were Allied anti-submarine weapons and radar truly this effective, or were U-boat tactics at fault? Frontline U-boat captains reported being swarmed by destroyers, hunted by radar-equipped aircraft day and night, and facing sudden new threats like homing torpedoes. In late April, even before the worst battles, Dönitz had attempted a tactical adjustment to counter Allied air patrols. On April 27th, he ordered all U-boats crossing the Bay of Biscay, departing or returning to French bases, to do so submerged at night and to surface only briefly in daylight to recharge batteries. This order backfired. It inadvertently made U-boats more vulnerable by keeping them on the surface during daylight hours, when Allied aircraft hunted the Bay of Biscay aggressively. By May, Coastal Command's long-range aircraft were ravaging U-boats in transit. At least 6 U-boats were destroyed by air patrols over the bay that month. Morale among U-boat crews began to plummet as it became clear that the odds were now stacked against them on every sortie. The once aggressive wolf packs found themselves on the defensive, struggling just to survive relentless depth charge barrages and aerial attacks. One U-boat commander, after enduring repeated convoy battles in May, likened the experience to marching the crew to their doom, grimly aware that the U-boat arm's earlier confidence had given way to fatalism, as later recounted in war memoirs. Admiral Dönitz reached a fateful decision. With U-boat losses continuing at an unsustainable rate, he ordered a temporary halt to U-boat operations in the North Atlantic. All remaining submarines were to withdraw from the North Atlantic convoy routes and regroup. He directed them to redeploy to areas beyond the range of land-based Allied air cover, for instance, the mid-Atlantic deep waters or other theatres, until new countermeasures or improved U-boat technologies could be developed. The North Atlantic, once the prime hunting ground of the wolfpacks, was effectively vacated by the U-boats for several months. Dönitz's own war diary entries from late May 1943 record his shock at the frightful total of U-boats destroyed and describe Black May as a heavy and unexpected blow. Even Adolf Hitler, informed of the U-boat withdrawal, was dismayed. Hitler railed against the decision, but Dönitz knew there was no choice. To continue the North Atlantic campaign in June 1943 would be simply to condemn more U-boat crews to the depths for little gain. The U-boat force would attempt to come back later in the year, and indeed sporadic patrols resumed by the fall of 1943. But the halcyon days of wolfpack dominance were over. Dönitz's capitulation in May 1943 was a pivotal strategic victory for the Allies. Black May has since been recognized as the turning point of the Battle of the Atlantic, after which the Allied control of the sea lanes steadily solidified. The U-boats, though they continued to fight and even introduced new technologies over the next 2 years, such as the snorkel for underwater running and revolutionary Type 21 U-boat designs, never regained the advantage or the impact they once had. Convoys sailed with increasing safety in the latter half of 1943 and into 1944. Allied shipbuilding now far outpaced losses, and the wolfpack tactic that had terrorized the Atlantic in 1941-42 was essentially defeated. German U-boat production actually peaked later in 1943, and inexperienced new U-boat crews were still sent out, only to be met by even stronger Allied defences and suffer heavy casualties. By mid-1943, the US and British navies were also taking the offensive, hunting U-boats in transit routes and in their coastal lairs. May 1943 thus marked the beginning of the end for the U-boat menace. Allied leaders, fully aware of the turnaround, immediately began reallocating resources from Atlantic convoy escort duty to support upcoming offensive operations in the Mediterranean and the invasion of France, confident that the critical North Atlantic lifeline was no longer in peril. Historians often compare the impact of Black May on the U-boat force to a decisive land battle. The phrase Stalingrad of the Atlantic has been invoked to describe the U-boat defeat, emphasizing how irrecoverable the losses were. The Allied victory in the Atlantic ensured that Britain would remain supplied, that American troops and material could safely cross the ocean, and that the Western Allies could build up for the eventual D-Day invasion. The strategic significance of winning the Atlantic War cannot be overstated. It was the prerequisite for all other Allied operations in Europe. The Battle of the Atlantic raged on to the war's end, but after Black May, the outcome was largely decided. The Atlantic lifeline was secure, and the German U-boat fleet had lost its bid to choke the Allies into submission. Black May stands as a testament to the convergence of Allied technology, strategy, and sacrifice, and it forever broke the back of the U-boat campaign, ending the last great threat to Allied control of the Atlantic.